Hi everyone, and welcome to week 5 of our Festivals and Fireworks Sew-Along, hosted by Pat Sloan at her website, ilovetomakequilts.com. This week I have 2 alternate versions for you on making our Pinwheel Sawtooth star, and for each video going forward I will have 2 alternate versions in each of the videos. The original purpose of the sew-along was to highlight the use of triangles on a roll or the triangle papers, and I'm not a person to use those, but I also like to, where I can, reduce the number of seams that are in a block so that I can make perfect use of any of the feature fabrics that I like to choose and not have them all broken up by seam allowances. So grab your fabric, grab your favorite beverage, and I'll show you how I do it. We're going to start this week's video with option A, because why? Because A comes before B. Who knew, hey? Anyway, with option A, we are going to make our pinwheel sawtooth star with our sew and flips in place of the half square triangles. And in option B, we will be making the same block, but using half square triangles and flying geese. So to get us started, I'm going to show you the traditional method of doing the sew and flips using pieces A and D. And to do that, we just need to grab 2 of those and draw a diagonal line from corner to corner in one direction, and then line up one of those pieces on our A rectangle, making sure that our angle is going the correct direction before taking it to the machine and stitching just to the right of our drawn line. Stitching to the right of the drawn line allows for any fabric that may be taken up by your thread when you press it back to check that everything is still lining up and square. Let's go. With our stitching now done, we just need to fold this back and check that all of our edges still line up. And you'll notice at the top there, it is very hard to see that I don't quite meet up on all 2 of those edges once I fold this back. And because I stitch with white cotton, or actually Color 2000 from Aurifil, the thread is also very hard to see. But if you look there at the top of my left hand, you'll notice that I didn't actually meet up quite on that edge, and I am actually going to unstitch that and re-sew. It's not much of a difference, but I'm just showing you that it's okay if it's wrong to unpick it and redo it until you're satisfied. You would have noticed there that I opted to take the other square that I'd already drawn the diagonal line on to use to redo this, and that's because my diagonal line actually wasn't drawn directly on the center. So when I stitched on it, even though I went to the right of the line, it was going as if I'd gone right on the line, and that was the difference that I was having with that piece. But now that we've re-sewn this one, well, I've checked for correctness already and all of the edges were lining up, so I'm going to press this into place and then trim away the back 2 layers of fabric. I'm then going to repeat this on the other side to complete our sew and flip unit, and in this instance we do the angle in the same direction on both ends, and you'll see that, and that's the traditional method of doing these sew and flips. For the remainder of these sew and flips, I am going to use my folded corner clipper tool. As you would be aware if you've seen any of my videos, it is my preferred method when doing these sew and flips. To use the folded corner clipper, we line up our fabrics the same, but we don't draw our diagonal line. What we do instead is we line up our measurements, in this instance that is the 3.5 inches, on that top square, making sure that all of our edges are lined up before taking our rotary blade and slicing this off. We then just take that to the machine and we sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we can just press these out towards our background fabric, and I'll do that for the remainder of all of the sew and flips. You would have seen there once I took that off the machine that I actually have sewed the seam on all of our little offcuts, and I will trim all those up later off camera and either put them in the part center or use them for something else in this quilt. I haven't decided yet. With our sew and flips completed, it's time to move on to our half square triangle units, and to do this we need fabrics B and C. On the back of our fabric B squares we will draw a diagonal line in one direction, corner to corner, before matching this right sides together with our C fabric, and then taking it to the machine and stitching a 1/4 inch on each side of our drawn line. It was at this point throughout recording that my phone rang and I absent-mindedly continued to work. The only thing that you miss seeing me do here is take the pieces off the sewing machine and cut them in half along their diagonal line. Now I'll meet you back at the pressing mat. We now need to press our half square triangles towards the darker of the two fabrics, and in this instance for me that is my red fabric. We'll then take them to the cutting mat and trim them down to our required size of 3.5 inches. My preferred trim down method is to do them 2 at a time because I'm impatient and I like quick results. Why else? So to do this, we make sure that our 2 half square triangle units are nice and nested along that seam line before taking our square ruler and putting our diagonal line along our stitching line. We then make sure that we have enough material outside our required trim down measurement, in this case that is 3.5 inches, before trimming away the first 2 sides. We'll then rotate the block around and line up once again our diagonal line on our stitching line, but now we can place our required trim down measurement on our freshly cut sides before trimming the final 2 sides. We'll do this for the other 2, and then it's time to lay out our block. Just showing you here that I have already pressed and trimmed down the offcuts from our sew and flips. They trimmed down to a 2.5 inch size, and for now I'm just putting them to the side. It's now time to lay out our block ready for final construction, and first of all we need to make our 4 units that will go together as a 4 patch. You will notice that these 4 units are actually constructed all the same, and when they are laid out it is simply just a 1/4 turn to do each of the 4 segments of our 4 patch. So I'm going to begin by sewing our half square triangle and the solid square together with our 1/4 inch seam, pressing that towards the solid fabric. We'll then put those back together and sew our sew and flip unit onto the left hand side, if you're looking at the right of my cutting board right now, and we'll press that towards our half square triangle unit. Now that we have each of our quadrants made, as I said, it is just a quarter turn for each one, moving around clockwise to create our final 4 patch for construction of option A of our Sawtooth star block. So now all we need to do is our 2 vertical seams and then our horizontal seams. On these edges here, where I'm just showing you at the top, you can do a hang pin to line that up, but if you know me, you know that I do my sew and hope method, and it always seems to work out okay. Now with our vertical seam sewn, I am going to press this towards that sew and flip, as that is the path of least resistance, and I'll do that on both of these, and then we will have an interlocking seam at that center intersection. We will have 2 more points where we could use the hang pin to line them up, but once again I'm going to use my sew and hope method, and we'll do the final horizontal seam, give this a final press, and option A will be done. While I was sewing this together, a few of my seam allowances have actually flipped in the opposite direction, so I'm just going to do my little clip into the seam allowance to make sure that my block lays flat and there's no bulk underneath when we get to the quilting. I'm going to give this a quick press along that seam first to set my seam, and putting a little bit of heat in there helps you with moving those seam allowances in a direction that they may not want to go. First, before I do that though, I am going to spin this center seam, as it is quite bulky with 8 pieces of fabric coming together. So as always, we just remove the few stitches that are above our horizontal stitching line that we've just done, and then we press those seam allowances in the direction that we want. In this instance, that is counterclockwise, and then we'll give this a final press from the front, and the center of our block will be nice and flat. You'll see that I haven't actually lined up many of my points, and I'm okay with that. So that is option A done. Let's move on to option B. You'll see on the reverse side of this week's cutting sheet that there are 2 separate cutting instructions, and option B is going to use flying geese with a traditional pinwheel in the middle made from half square triangles. So I've already cut those pieces ahead of time, and I'm just going to pull them all out now, and we are going to do the half square triangles the 2 at a time method, and we will use the 4 at a time flying geese to do the flying geese because we need 4 of them. So just let me get organized here and I'll meet you back. To begin with option B, we are going to start with our half square triangles to create the pinwheel in the center of the block. To do this, we'll once again use the 2 at a time method, which I described earlier. So I will scrub through this, but in a nutshell, we'll draw a diagonal line, match this up with our right sides together, so a 1/4 of an inch on each side of our drawn line, press to set our stitches, cut them in half along that drawn line, press towards the dark side before trimming them down in your preferred method. We're now going to make our flying geese using the 4 at a time method. To do this, we will take the 4 smaller squares, in this instance that's our D squares, and draw a diagonal line in one direction corner to corner on all 4 of them. We'll then take 2 of these 4 squares and place them across on the diagonal on the larger square, maintaining a straight line across that diagonal of the larger block before taking it to the machine and stitching 1/4 of an inch on each side of our drawn line. Now that we've stitched 1/4 of an inch on each side of that line, I like to give it a press first to set those seams and to straighten out any crinkles because we are sewing across the bias. We're now going to slice this in half along our drawn line before taking it back to the pressing mat and pressing our little peaks out, and it will resemble a love heart or a cat's face. We'll then take the remaining 2 smaller squares that we set aside before and place these once again across the diagonal from the peaks towards the bottom corner. We'll take that back to the machine and we'll once again sew 1/4 of an inch on each side of our drawn line. With that now complete, it's time once again to give this a quick press to set our seams, and then we will cut this in half once again along our drawn line before pressing our little peaks out away from our background center. We'll then trim this down using your preferred method. My preferred method with the 4 at a time is to use my Ultimate Flying Geese tool from Creative Grids. I'm indicating here now that you find your measurement for the size that you're making. In this instance, we need a finished size of 3x6, which gives me the reference line of F. We line that up in the peak of our Flying Geese unit, as you can see here, before trimming off the first 2 sides. We then rotate the block and the tool. We use that same reference line on the other side, lining up our peak once again, plus our freshly cut sides, and then we trim off the final 2 sides. It is possible to trim these down with a standard quilting ruler also, and I have now popped the card in the top right hand corner of your screen to my 4 at a time Flying Geese tutorial, where all of this is done step by step and a lot slower. We now need to lay the block out ready for final construction, but before we can start the final construction, we actually need to make our pinwheel in the center. So we lay our blocks out ready to do that, and to create our pinwheel, we just need to make sure that we have all of our fabrics going in the right way. Obviously, I'm having a tough time discerning that at this moment. And then we'll sew this little 4 patch together to make our pinwheel. We'll start by doing the vertical seams and then the horizontal seams, as we do with all 4 patches. Once we've gotten that done, I'll once again swirl the center of that, because we will have 8 pieces of fabric coming together. And then we'll move on to the final layout and the 9 patch construction to complete this block. I don't know what's happening with the sewing machine moving all over the place today. Actually, I do. I kept bumping the camera because it was right in my way. We're going to swirl the center of this block again, as I said, and to do so, we just remove those few stitches that are on top of our horizontal stitching line. We then twist that center part open and we move all of our seam allowances in the same direction. So in this instance, that's counterclockwise. You'll see we end up with a tiny little pinwheel in the center there, and this moves all 8 layers of our fabric in an even distribution. And you'll notice there that I didn't quite get the pinwheel right on, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to press ahead anyway. Once we've gotten this section done, we will lay the block out again as per the diagram, and 9 patch construction will apply. To do the 9 patch construction, we'll start once again by doing all of our vertical seams, followed by our final 2 horizontal seams. The top and the bottom row we will press out towards the solid square, and in the middle we will press towards our pinwheel. Because we pressed the way that we did, the top section out and the middle section in, we will be able to nest these 2 seams. The only other spot that you need worry about is lining up the middle of your flying geese with the center seam on our pinwheel before doing our 2 horizontal seams. We'll then just press this out towards the top and the bottom row. So that was option B, made with the flying geese 4 at a time and the half square triangles. You saw in the first part of the video where we did the first option, option A, using the sew and flips and the half square triangles. So once again, with these videos to go with the festivals and fireworks, I'm all about showing you alternate ways to do each block. If you would like me to include all of the options in future videos, as I have done today, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for joining me again this week, folks. I really enjoy putting these videos together for you, and all I ask in return is that you click that little like button, subscribe if you haven't done so, ring the bell so that you'll be notified of all my future updates, and leave me a comment to tell me how you think I'm doing and what you might like to see. It really does help me out. So that's it for this week. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.